On this edition of the CBS Video Library of World War II, we'll focus on two of the largest amphibious assaults the world has ever seen. The very first Allied invasion of the war on the shores of North Africa and the D-Day landing on the beaches at Normandy. We'll also profile the German general who played a role in both of those historic encounters, the man known as the Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel. Let's go back now to the summer of 1942. Nazi Germany controls Europe from the English Channel to the gates of Stalingrad. Axis power extends to North Africa, where Rommel's Africa Corps and Italian forces are crashing toward the Suez Canal. The Allies must counterattack, and soon. But where? The fateful decision is made. Target, North Africa. That's our story. It's a story with an ironic twist. For this one time in World War II, we fought not with, but against French forces.
What is French North Africa, which the Allies will invade in the autumn of 1942? Although much of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia is desert, they contain such cosmopolitan cities as Casablanca in Morocco, which harbors ships of the French Navy immobilized since the fall of France. In neighboring Algeria, the port of Oran also holds elements of the once powerful, now silent French fleet. The dazzling metropolis of Algiers is the administrative and transportation center of French North Africa. Most of the colonial government is loyal to the Vichy regime in unoccupied France. The military wants no more war. General Auguste Noguez on the left, military governor of Morocco, and General Alphonse Juin, center, army commander-in-chief in North Africa, know their weaknesses. The French North African army, restricted by the German armistice to 120,000 troops, has been told by Hitler that if any of them, French or native, fight for the Allies, all of France will be occupied. The French Navy is bitter over two British attempts in 1940 to destroy its fleet, one at Oran and the second at Dakar, with the help of General de Gaulle's Free French. Since the fall of France, her ships have held to port. Hatred of England and defeatism are rife in old Marshal Henri Petain's collaborationist regime in Vichy. The Allies are especially concerned about the reaction of strong men like Admiral Darlan, right, who heads all French armed forces, if an invasion is launched and the fat is in the fire. The fire will be lit by Operation Torch, the plan to land in Morocco and Algeria behind Rommel's forces, then take Tunisia from which to attack supply lines, then form a pincers with the British Army in Egypt to crush Rommel. To lead this risky venture in his first combat command is Major General Dwight D. Eisenhower, age 52. Green American troops must be turned into a crushing military force. Most of them have less than 1 year's service. By mid-1942, large numbers of GIs begin the journey which will take them to England and Scotland for further training, and then on to their first action. Many are transported aboard the luxury liner Queen Mary, which now wears wartime gray. To smooth Allied entry, a cloak and dagger operation is in the making. President Roosevelt's special representative in French Africa, Robert Murphy.
I contacted our French friends in the resistance movement in North Africa, including a number of the high-ranking staff officers in the Army, Navy, and Air Force. They were laboring under the assumption that our landing would not be in November 1942, but would be the following spring. I had no authority at that time to communicate with anybody on the French side until 4 days before the landing was actually due to happen. So that restricted our operation. But in talking to them about the longer-term prospect, they insisted on staff meetings, so that I asked General Eisenhower whether he could not send some of his staff officers down to Algeria for a secret meeting with the French military, which he did. And he selected General Mark W. Clark for the purpose.
I received the first indication that our government would like an American senior officer and some of his staff to go into North Africa by submarine on a Sunday morning in October. While I was reading this message, The phone rang, the direct one from Ike's desk, and he said, "Wayne, have you seen the message?" And I said, "I'm reading it." And he said, "Well, come on up." So I went into his office. As I did so, he said, "What do you think of it?" Well, I said, "I expect it's a pretty good idea." Well, he said, "Who'll go?" Well, I said, "It's either you or I." Well, and I know you can't go. He said, "Well, you G2'd it right. So you're the one to go."
Thus began one of the great cloak and dagger operations of World War II. General Clark and 4 aides flew secretly from England to Gibraltar. There they boarded the British submarine Seraph, whose skipper knew only that he was to take the Americans to the coast of North Africa. Destination, a lonely beach house west of Algiers to meet with America's special representative, Robert Murphy, and several high French officers at midnight on October 22nd, 1942. General Clark.
We immediately went into a conference, and I had been instructed directly from the president that I would give no indication to these Frenchmen that a landing by the Americans and the British was about to take place, but that I should talk more or less around the subject that we had hopes of making a landing sometime, and to try to find out the best way to do it from their point of view. We were able to get all kinds of information, every bit that we wanted, where the munitions were, where were gasoline stocks, where we could drop our paratroopers, the few we had, and what would be the reaction of the French fleet, which we knew would be rather hostile, which generals would fight us and which would cooperate. As the day wore on, I heard a windmill on the house going rather rapidly, and I knew the sea was picking up. And as the day went on, the waves got worse, and I was out there about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon taking a look when the phone rang. I heard the owner answer it, and he yelled, "Police," and that's the same in English as it is in French. Well, consternation broke loose. I never saw Frenchmen pick up their marbles and leave as fast as they did, but away they went. And I directed that we get our little boats, and as I was starting out the front door, the lookout we had down the road, we had it in both directions, a Frenchman signaled that the police were coming. I went back into the house and asked the Frenchman where we could hide, and he pulled a rug up and opened a trap door that was down into a wine cellar. Unfortunately, it was an empty wine cellar. In the meantime, the police came, and Bob Murphy and the Frenchman put on a magnificent act as though a party had been going on with some women, and that he, as the American consul, would be embarrassed if any publicity were given out on it. And although the police searched the house for about 45 minutes and walked over this trapdoor, they came to no conclusions and decided to leave and report to their chief.
On the beach, Clark and his group, stripped to their underwear, carry their clothes, try to reach the Seraph. His inflatable boat capsizes. Clark loses his trousers. On a second try, they reach the British submarine. By the time General Clark returns to England with his valuable report, troops already are boarding ships in Britain and America for an undisclosed destination, an undisclosed D-Day. The men will not know where they are going for several more days. Few link this departure with North Africa, where, at this time, the great Battle of El Alamein is just beginning, and Rommel is about to be pushed westward toward the other jaw of that pincers which these men will compose. A grand strategy has begun. Three task forces with more than 100,000 men aboard move toward their target, now known to be North Africa. From the United Kingdom, 2 forces consisting of 77 ships and 74,000 British and American troops move toward Gibraltar, the Mediterranean, and their objectives, Oran and Algiers. From the U.S., the Western Task Force, with 34,000 Americans under Major General George S. Patton, Jr., approach Casablanca. The Free French forces of General de Gaulle are excluded from the operation. Roosevelt, among others, has given these orders.
He did not want to recognize any individual, whether de Gaulle or anybody else, as a head of a French government because his insistence was we deal with French officials on the local level only, so that the French people would be absolutely free to select their own government after liberation. And he did not intend to be party, or have the United States be party, to any effort to impose a group, any group, on the French people. And this was, of course, the thing that brought us into direct conflict with General de Gaulle, who felt that he was, by some sort of mystique or magic, the elected or anointed representative to head the French provisional government, although he'd never been elected to any office. So this was one of the political problems with which we had to cope at that time.
Needed, however, is a non-political French military leader around whom all elements in North Africa can gather. The Allies picked General Henri Giraud, a war hero who, having escaped from a German prison, will be spirited from hiding in France by a British submarine. Meanwhile, by a stroke of fate, the commander-in-chief of all French forces, Admiral Dalland, has come from Vichy to Algiers to see his son stricken with polio. And so, by chance, the supreme French military authority is on the scene as the moment of invasion approaches. As the convoys plow ahead, General Clark is at Gibraltar with General Eisenhower.
And Ike turned to me and he said, "Wayne, the weather report at Casablanca is not good." And I said, "I know." And he said, "Georgie Patton may not be able to land in that kind of weather." Well, I said, if he doesn't, he knows very thoroughly that we have plans B, C, D, and E, alternate plans, that we'll tell him exactly what to do and which one he'll execute. And Ike said, "Well, are you sure Georgie understands him?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Why don't you send him a message?" So I wrote a letter to his flagship and sent it by radio. "Dear Georgie, we understand the weather reports are not too favorable at Casablanca, but we know that if anybody can put his troops ashore, that you're the one that can do it. But in the event that you cannot, you are to let us know, and we will tell you exactly which plan, B, C, D, or E, that you will execute. Please confirm." And in a few hours, I get a message back from Georgie Patton. "Dear Wayne, I have your message. I thoroughly understand it. I think we will be able to land and accomplish our mission in Casablanca, but if I cannot, I will be subject to your alternate plans, none of which I like. I greatly prefer that if I am unable to land at Casablanca, that I take my forces and land them in Spain and start attacking north, where I'll surely meet the German." And when I read that to Ike, he gasped as I did, and he said, "Send him another message that under no circumstances will he ever land in Spain." I'm sure Georgie was having a little fun with us at that critical time.
Closer and closer to the North African mainland comes the Great Armada. Soon to be tested in battle, the green troops from America sew U.S. flags to their jackets so the French will know they are Americans. They receive a final briefing on their special mission from General Patton.
"Soldiers and sailors, it is not known whether the French African army will contest our landing, but all resistance, by whomever offered, must be destroyed. However, when any of the French soldiers seek to surrender, you will accept it and treat them with the respect due a brave opponent and future ally. Remember, the French are not Nazis or Japs."
Gibraltar, November 7th. The day before the North African invasion, General Giraud arrives to meet with General Eisenhower.
I've never seen a more forlorn individual in my life. I can remember now his bristling mustache, and he sat there, and he demanded that he be placed in supreme command of all American, British troops and go in as the commander-in-chief of the landing. Well, we explained to him that he was unfamiliar with the plans, he had no staff to work with, that we would be willing to set him up as a deputy, to put him in as the supreme French commander when we landed, but he would have no part of it. So we put him to bed that night, and it wasn't until the next night that we were able to persuade General Giraud that it was in the best interest of his country and ours that he go in as the supreme French commander.
Invasion Eve. The ships are nearing land and the air cover takes off from Gibraltar. The Allies still can only hope that the French reaction will not be hostile. General Eisenhower's order of the day is communicated to the French. Only if the French open hostilities will the Allies retaliate. The French can show their friendship by directing vertical searchlight beams by night and by flying American and French flags by day. Our first battle, says Prime Minister Winston Churchill, is to have no battle with the French. To cut down resistance from French officers, the initial waves are almost all American, although right behind some of them, the forces are actually all British. Near midnight, November 7th, the landing craft begin their rendezvous. Later, a few searchlights are seen, apparently giving the vertical signal, and this raises Allied hopes momentarily. It is a false signal. In Algiers, Robert Murphy goes to see General Juin, commander of the French army in Algeria, to break the news.
When our troops were landing, I went to his house, and it was then about 12:30 at night, and with some difficulty got through the Senegalese guards around the house and had the general waked up, came down to the drawing room of his house in pajamas and listened to this story with quite a bit of shock and amazement, at the end of which he said that he was entirely with us, but that no matter what orders he might issue, they could be countermanded by his commander-in-chief, who was then Admiral Darlan. And as a result of this conversation, he telephoned Darlan, waked him up, and Darlan came over to Juin's house, and I then had a negotiation with Admiral Darlan. And when I described this situation, he lost his temper and said that he had always considered the Americans more intelligent than the British, but he had come to the conclusion after hearing my story about the landing that we were, if anything, more stupid than the British, because his theory was that an operation like this one that we're discussing should occur simultaneously in North Africa and in metropolitan France simultaneously, because otherwise he visualized great destruction in France with full occupation of the country by the Germans.
Nothing can be done to avoid conflict. At some points, the French are resisting fiercely, and the Allies must retaliate. French resistance is sporadic, depending on the allegiance of the local commanders. The French fleet elects to fight. At Casablanca, the unfinished battleship Jean Bart turns her guns on an onrushing Allied fleet in the one and only battle of her life. The French fleet, however, cannot match Allied firepower, and its resistance is soon ended. On the Allied side, much is learned about staging a massive invasion by sea. In those first few hours and days, hard lessons are learned about getting equipment ashore and across the beaches. They will be remembered in Sicily, Italy, and Normandy.
The British and American forces came into Algiers, and there was a great concern there, as I remember when I went in and met with Robert Murphy, and Bob came to me and said, "Wayne, The French are beginning to be a little bit concerned about the lack of strength that they see in the American forces. And I said, well, Bob, they're all deployed along the beaches. They're doing pretty well. And he said, well, they'd like to see some strength. Why don't you run your tanks all through the city of Algiers? And I said, fine, Bob, I'll be glad to do it. I'll run both of them. And he said, what? Don't tell me you only got 2 tanks. I said, that's all we've got ashore at the present time.
The buildup quickly gains momentum, and soon Anglo-American forces are moving beyond the coast and into Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers, although some French ground troops continue to resist. Against the weight of Allied armor, French resistance begins to give way. By the end of D-Day, there is an armistice in Algiers, but fighting continues elsewhere. 2 days later, Oran surrenders. At Casablanca, a few German functionaries are captured. In Algiers, the day after its capture, General Giraud enters to take command of all French forces. Welcomed by Robert Murphy and other Allied officials, Giraud is treated coolly by the French military. General Clark finds he has to deal with Admiral Darlan, who many in Allied circles consider a collaborationist. General Clark.
When I landed in Algiers, Darlan felt that he was the supreme French authority in North Africa. So I had to meet with him, and I had conference after conference with him, day and night, trying to persuade him to cease fire, to stop the fighting, to join with us, to bring the French fleet into North Africa so we could all join hands and fight the common enemy that we despised, the German. Now, it took many conferences finally and a lot of threatening to establish martial law, and I even put Darlan in arrest at one occasion and moved American troops around his house in order to get compliance with him. He finally gave in, and he gave me his word that he would issue orders to all of the troops that then were fighting the Americans, both in the Casablanca area and in Oran and Algiers, and that they would all turn with us, and we would move towards Tunisia, for we got indications that the Germans were about to move into that area. So that is the way that we did business with Darlan. We had to. He was the one man that every Frenchman was obeying, and we could not ignore him.
On November 11th, Armistice Day of World War I, General Noguez goes to see General Patton, a fellow soldier from that war, to surrender Morocco. Says Patton, "You and I once fought side by side. Now we can work together again." With the arrival of Eisenhower in Algiers, Admiral Darlan is appointed political chief of French North Africa, with Giraud as military commander. 6 weeks later, on Christmas Eve, an Algerian assassin will shoot and kill him. During the time left to him, Darlan keeps his pledge to cooperate, although what he has feared does occur, complete occupation of France by the Germans. American, British, and French forces again march together, through the throngs and toward the Axis enemy in neighboring Tunisia. 6 months of hard, bloody fighting still remain, across desert and mountains, from Kasserine Pass to Cap Bon and Bizerta, before North Africa is cleared of the Axis. But the commitment has been made on the long road toward Hitler's Europe.
We look now at the military career of the legendary general who fought the Allies in Africa and opposed them on the beaches at Normandy. He was a man totally dedicated to the business of war. We pick up the story of Erwin Rommel with his arrival in North Africa.
February 1941. British forces have pushed across half of Italian Libya. To Tripoli, capital of Mussolini's province, help arrives from the Duce's Axis partner, Germany. An expeditionary force which, according to a British intelligence summary, is led by an obscure General Rommel. At 49, Erwin Rommel is former head of Hitler's personal guard and has demonstrated his cleverness as a tank commander in the campaigns against Poland and France. Now he quickly reaffirms his cleverness by parading his Africa Corps through the streets of Tripoli, then doubling them around the block and parading them again to impress the war-weary Italians and British spies. The trick works. By the time the Africa Corps prepares to move toward the enemy, the British have greatly overestimated Rommel's force and lifted from obscurity the man they'll soon nickname the Desert Fox. Before either the enemy or his Axis chiefs expect it, the Fox attacks and forces the British and Commonwealth troops to withdraw. Rommel's Germans and Italians pursue. First major victory, El Agheila. Speed and surprise prove a winning combination. The enemy he deceives, then devours with his superior tactics and better tanks. Rommel is a restless man, ever at the front, thriving on victory. We've been attacking with dazzling success, he writes to his wife. I can't sleep for happiness. Benghazi is taken, over 500 miles in 9 days. But now Rommel has stiffened the backs of the Italians and made bold, arrogant warriors out of his catch-as-catch-can Africa Corps. With dash and daring, Rommel moves toward crippling the British and clearing Libya. Hitler sends delirious congratulations. But Rommel knows desert warfare is like fighting at sea. To occupy miles of sand is of minor importance. To knock out the enemy's armor is the prize. Flying his own reconnaissance plane from place to place, Rommel allows no one any rest, least of all himself. British officers will soon be warned by their commander-in-chief that Rommel is becoming a kind of magician or bogeyman to our troops. We must not always keep harping on Rommel. Then at Tobruk, British and Commonwealth forces dig in their heels. Rommel needs this port city close to his front to receive supplies for his drive. He attacks. Tobruk holds. Rommel has neither the men nor supplies for static warfare, nor the personal makeup. He must keep moving. Leaving Italian forces to pound Tobruk, he thrusts his Africa Corps eastward toward Egypt. They quickly fight to the border. Except for Tobruk, which remains a thorn in his side, Rommel has within weeks cleared Italian Libya of the enemy. More important, he has chewed up or captured vast quantities of enemy machines and manpower. But the Africa Corps is undersupplied itself. It cannot move forward until reinforced. It is summer, frying weather in the desert. Outside, temperatures range around 140 degrees. Inside the tanks, 160. Rommel is impatient with the delay. Half of his supplies are being sunk in the Mediterranean. It is a picnic for no one, except for the desert flies. On the British side, things are looking up. Supplies from home and Commonwealth countries are being augmented by Lend-Lease shipments from the United States. Rommel is only too aware of this. When he impatiently informs Berlin, Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering sneers, "The Americans only know how to make razor blades." Replies Rommel, "We could do with some of those razor blades." General Sir Claude Auchinleck has come in to command what is now known as the British Eighth Army, a polyglot force including Australians, New Zealanders, South Africans, Indians, even Free French and Free Poles. While Rommel, now being resupplied, is preparing his attack, Auchinleck beats him to the punch. In the fall of 1941, 8th Army tanks, some 700 of them, superior in number if not in quality to the Germans, move unnoticed to the front. Then on November 18th, Operation Crusader begins. Rommel, who had moved so quickly into Egypt, is now caught off balance and outnumbered, and just as quickly retreats, losing 2/3 of his army. But before he reaches his starting point, he counterattacks. It is a gamble, but it works, halts the British and rolls them back. Then in June 1942, Rommel throws his tanks into a violent, week-long battle known as the Witches' Cauldron. British armor is outgunned and outmaneuvered. More than half their tanks are destroyed, and the rest limp back to Egypt. The initiative gained, Rommel streaks for Tobruk, his old nemesis. Fortress Tobruk, which held out for 9 months the previous year, is taken in one day. 33,000 prisoners of war, 1,000 armored vehicles destroyed or captured. To Erwin Rommel, from his Fuhrer, comes a promotion. Hitler has made me a field marshal, he writes his wife. I would much rather he had given me one more division. To his soldiers he promises, we will not rest until we have shattered the last remnants of the British 8th Army. His lightning push and the British counterdrive of a year ago are far outshone by what Rommel and his army do now in 1942. They slash across the Egyptian border. The initiative is theirs. They move on and on toward Alexandria, the Suez Canal, and Axis mastery of North Africa. Rommel races to within 70 miles of Alexandria. Now to the south, the land is impassable. To the north is the sea. Close ahead is the goal. But here is El Alamein. Vehicles of the British 8th Army retreat eastward, clogging the Egyptian coastal highway. The lucky ones make it, but many are captured. 85% of Rommel's transport now consists of captured British vehicles. General Auchinleck has no intention of abandoning El Alamein, a perfect bottleneck of land to restrict the freewheeling tactics of Rommel. The 8th Army turns around and digs in. Militarily, says Rommel, this is the most difficult period I've ever been through. In rigid, static warfare, the British are masters. It is midsummer 1942. In Europe, the Germans are pushing toward Stalingrad. If they can link up with Rommel, the Middle East will be won from the Allies and perhaps the war as well. Down from London to look over the situation and prod his generals comes the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. The Germans, he warns, must not reach the Suez Canal. Churchill has called Rommel a very daring and skillful opponent. But Churchill thinks he may have found the man to match the field marshal. On the other side, Rommel is the hero of the Axis, and his front is a must for visiting German and Italian generals. When he warns them that supplies are the key to Suez, they laugh reassuringly and make promises they cannot keep. He finds enjoyment in visiting with his men, decorating his heroes and encouraging them. Certainly, he tells them, the Fuhrer understands the Army's problems. It is the bureaucrats at home who are to blame for lack of support. In September 1942, Rommel, tired and worried, returns to Germany on sick leave. He sees Hitler and explains that Alexandria cannot be taken without more and better supplies. Hitler decorates him, shows him some secret weapons, supposedly in mass production, says not to worry. I wonder if he told me all that to keep me quiet, Rommel later confides to his wife. After more reassurances and a field marshal's baton from Hitler, Rommel further confides, I suspect that the last one out of his door is always right. As Rommel needs Hitler, so Hitler uses Rommel, whose popularity is second only to the Fuhrer's. Accompanied by propaganda minister Goebbels, The field marshal does his bidding. He tells foreign journalists in Berlin that his army will soon be in Alexandria. While the Desert Fox is in Germany, about to enter a hospital, in the desert the British 8th Army is getting used to its new commander, slight but wiry General Bernard Montgomery, whom Churchill had handpicked to pit against Erwin Rommel. They're a lot alike, inquisitive, sharp, foxy fighters. Montgomery has studied Rommel closely, even pins a picture of his adversary above his planning table. Day by day, the 8th Army has regained strength as vast supplies of tanks and planes, many of them U.S.-made, now pour in by sea, the ships sailing around Africa and up the Red Sea to deliver them. October 23rd, Monty gives the order. The Battle of El Alamein is trumpeted by 1,000 field guns in the desert night. Of the second day, Rommel flies back from the hospital in Germany. He organizes a counteroffensive, but it fails. Short of supplies, his reserves already committed, he is powerless. His armor is dissolving under enemy land and air superiority. Says Rommel, it was obvious that from now on the British would destroy us bit by bit. He orders a retreat, then receives word from Hitler to stand fast to victory or death. Rommel is stunned. For the first time, I didn't know what to do. But Rommel obeys. This decision costs him, as he knew it would, the cream of his army captured by the enemy. He is presiding over the first mass surrender of Axis troops in the war. Suddenly, Rommel countermands Hitler's order, directs a retreat. He flies to tell Hitler so. Go, replies his Fuhrer. I have other things to do than talk to you. So the army stays in Africa, and the retreat goes on. 1,700 miles in 122 days. Rommel fights skillful rearguard actions, but falls back beyond where he had started. Our star is on the decline, he says, as he is recalled from Africa in March 1943. He returns to Germany to face his Fuhrer and an uncertain fate.
After drifting from assignment to assignment for 9 months, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel got a new job from his Fuhrer in December 1943 to inspect Germany's anti-invasion coastal defenses from Scandinavia to Spain.
Hitler has realized that to demote Rommel would be self-defeating. Rommel is too popular and loyal. Besides, his talents will be useful to prepare against the Allied invasion expected the following spring. What Rommel sees appalls him. The much vaunted Atlantic Wall is incomplete, full of holes. Rommel goes to work. He inspects the defenses from the sea, from the enemy's viewpoint, as he had often done successfully in North Africa. He is assigned to defend the main invasion coast of Belgium and France. He and his superior, Field Marshal Karl von Rundstedt, quickly lock horns. Rommel wants to stop the enemy on the beaches. Rundstedt favors holding back reserves until the main landing force is identified. It is at this time that Rommel is contacted by certain Germans who want to arrest Hitler and negotiate peace with the West. Rommel listens, asks to be kept advised. Rommel concentrates his efforts on the anti-invasion defenses. Land and underwater mines soon crowd French and Belgian beaches. Some coastal gun emplacements receive concrete covers. Barbed wire and tank traps are ready. Within months, he sets 4 million mines, twice as many as in the previous 3 years. Fortunately for the Allies, Rommel has only months, not years, at his disposal. I'm out on the move a lot, he writes, and raising plenty of dust wherever I go.
Im Hinblick auf unsere starken Anlagen, im Hinblick auf den vorzüglichen Geist unserer Truppe, auf die neue Bewaffnung und die Kampfmittel, die uns in die Hand gegeben sind, können wir den kommenden Ereignissen mit größter Ruhe entgegensehen und brauchen uns keine Sekunde den Kopf zerbrechen, ob es gut oder schlecht geht. Es geht bestimmt gut und ich glaube nicht, dass der Engel ein zweites Mal wiederkommt, wenn er hier den Versuch macht.
As spring 1944 passes, the Germans still have no agreed defense plan. Invasion is expected in late June, so Rommel flies home for his wife's birthday, June 6, 1944. Ironically, as at El Alamein, Rommel returns late. He finds his defenses breached and few strong reserves available. He counterattacks. I have never before sent men to certain death, he admits. Everything would be all right if you would only fight better, Adolf Hitler tells Rommel when the Marshal advises seeking peace with the invaders. The Fuhrer angrily orders him to stand fast. But Allied planes rule the roads and German reserves cannot reach the front. The end is in sight, Rommel writes to Hitler, again advising peace. Two days later, July 17th, a British plane overtakes Rommel's staff car. The car careens into a tree and Rommel suffers a triple skull fracture. He is rushed unconscious to a hospital and expected to die. On July 20th, just 3 days later, a bomb shatters Hitler's headquarters. It had been brought there by one of the group which earlier had contacted Rommel. Hitler escapes with a slight injury to his right arm. Secretly, he directs a roundup of the plotters. One of them, in his death throes, calls out the name Rommel. Surviving his own accident, Rommel has his picture taken to prove this to the British who have announced his death. By August 1944, Rommel is recuperating at home, enjoying visits from his neighbors. He has been visited as well by some who were involved in the bomb plot. Hitler, he declares angrily, should have been arrested by the army, not made a martyr of. But Rommel, bold in war, does nothing. We are soldiers. Politics don't concern us, he has said. This from a man who served the Nazi Party early and stayed with it almost to the end. When summoned to Berlin, Rommel, fearing Hitler, delays for medical reasons. I would never get there alive. They would kill me on the way, he says. I'm not afraid of the English or the Americans, only of the Russians and the Germans. On October 13th, Hitler orders Rommel's house surrounded. Given an ultimatum, death by suicide or a Nazi trial and death by hanging, Rommel tells his wife, in a quarter of an hour, I shall be dead. His former chief of staff describes what happened.
Rommel was forced to commit suicide, to take poison. Rommel drove by car with 2 generals sent from Hitler with the poison into a forest and then the two generals and the driver made a walk. In the meantime, Rommel took the poison, and when the three persons went back, he was dead.
This is Erwin Rommel's death mask. I noticed a deep contempt on his face, which we had never seen in life, his wife says when she sees him a few hours after his death. And then a telegram from Hitler. Please accept my deepest sympathy on the loss of your husband. The name of Marshal Rommel will always be linked with the heroic fighting in North Africa. National mourning is ordered by Hitler, who does not appear at the state funeral. Rommel's death is officially attributed to his former injury. His heart belonged to the Fuhrer, says Field Marshal von Rundstedt in the eulogy. Rommel's wife and son listen. They know the truth. But few who watched the funeral procession know that Rommel, who served the Nazi tyranny so willingly and well, had been doomed by his master, Adolf Hitler, the madman whom all of Germany is following down the same road, to doom.
Despite his failures and defeats, General Rommel remains a man of military legend. What Rommel had faced on the shores of France had been quite simply the greatest amphibious operation in the history of warfare. We'll examine that awesome event as we look in detail at D-Day, the build-up and the invasion. The invasion plan was called Overlord, and the man responsible for its execution was the Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. At the time, he said the stage was being set for a great and crucial test.
Operation Overlord, the invasion of Europe, has as its first problem logistics. Men and fighting equipment must be assembled within striking distance of the point of attack, Britain. Ships from Canada and the United States come in a steady stream, drop their loads, and hurry back for more. Seaports are the funnel through which England, like a bottle, is being filled to the neck. 1.5 million United States fighting men are welcomed as comrades in arms by the British, Canadians, and other allies. Nearly 3 million fighting men cram into England, Scotland, Ireland for the attack. 5 million tons of American equipment alone pile into these islands, no bigger overall than Oregon. Across the channel, the moat for Hitler's fortress, are German soldiers and 250,000 conscripted laborers, working to build a thick ribbon of concrete along the beaches of the French coast. Rommel, not always in agreement with von Rundstedt, argues that if the landing forces get past the beaches, the Germans are lost. He takes his case to Hitler. We must stop them on the beaches. Hitler agrees. Eisenhower gathers about him the best military brains in the free world. Montgomery of Alamein, Admiral Ramsey, Lee Mallory, Spots, Crerar, Tedder. With senior advisors Marshall and Leahy, they plan and prepare. And to lead the U.S. ground forces, his trusted good friend, Omar Bradley. Young men who have been taught to admire the Christian principles of fair play, good sportsmanship, and forgiveness all their lives, are taught a new rule in a few months. Kill or be killed. German construction moves ahead. Von Rundstedt has been on the job for 18 months, but Rommel forces a change in his defense plan. The strength that adds the extras. Between them, it would seem, they have thought of everything. This is their operational war map. Submarine mines strung out in the water. Land mines and jagged steel spears on the beaches. Barriers at the high water mark to stop tanks and landing craft. All of these covered by machine guns and automatic rifles. hundreds and hundreds of these weapons on the roads, in the villages, in the fields. Giant railway guns on tracks parallel to the beaches, ready to duel with any battleship. Monster field artillery pieces and mortars. Rockets that scream out to sea. The Nazis use every trick of military defense. Infantry traps, tank traps, roadblocks, barricades, intricate systems of canals. Artificial floods in the lower parts of the land to force troops and vehicles to bypass them and move over crossroads under fire of howitzers and mortars. And back from the beaches, a line of bunkers, concrete ramparts connected by underground tunnels. All of these protect still another bulwark of defense, the fortified towns. French citizens have long since been evacuated. Only German soldiers patrol the streets. Behind all this, roving, fast-moving panzer divisions, ready to sweep forward and plug any breach in the defenses in front of them. This is defense in depth, even if the Allies can stay on it. Supporting the plan, the seemingly infallible plan, the men, picked of the Wehrmacht, tired now, but still Hitler's most formidable weapon. In Britain, the hour draws close. Men react differently in crisis. For some, the mask of gaiety effectively hides the mounting tension, the twinge of fear. The paratroopers and glider-borne men will go in first. Their training is severe. They are to drop behind the German front lines, cut off supplies, disrupt the movement of armored units, and by so doing, take some of the pressure off the infantrymen on the beaches. They know this. They also know how tough it will be. The Germans also prepare. German soldiers dressed in Allied uniforms are used in officer briefings. This is Know Your Enemy, Nazi version.
Da könnten sich die beiden auch nicht träumen lassen.
Bestimmt nicht. Und nun einige Worte zur Ausbildung der wirklichen amerikanischen Fallschirmtruppe, die ja bekanntlich nach deutschem Vorbild aufgebaut ist. Hier zwei Angehörige der feindlichen Fallschirmtruppen. Der ist Sergeant bei den Amerikanern. Auf dem linken Oberarm trägt er die amerikanische Flagge. Darunter das Rangabzeichen. Und hier das Fallschirmjägerabzeichen. Der da gehört zur englischen Fallschirmtruppe. Er ist Kanadier. Parachute als Fallschirm. Darunter das entsprechende Abzeichen. Das muss jeder deutsche Soldat wissen.
The 80th will be high group and the 764th will be low group. Remember that your biggest enemy is still the single-engine fighter plane. Now, you bombardiers, take your time in going in on your releases. The commanding general of Bomber Command asked us to put out a special effort today, so let's give it to him.
In March of 1944, General Eisenhower feels Germany's industrial output can no longer affect the invasion. So he changes targets from Germany to France, against the advice of some air experts. He puts air power to tactical use, moves U.S. and RAF bombers against prime objectives in France. Coastal defenses, railroads, communications, roads and bridges. The second objective, destroy the Luftwaffe, make them come up. The German High Command takes the bait. It makes sense. The Pas-de-Calais is at the Channel's narrowest point. The Allies have given it their closest attention. troops are massed opposite it. Von Rundstedt is certain. Hitler vacillates. Rommel wonders. At Schaeff, Allied plans seem to be going smoothly. Under the confident exterior, every commander is worried. Are we sending men to accomplish the impossible? All roads lead to the ports of exit. Men and equipment that has taken 2 years to move in are moved out overnight. Security regulations are unprecedented. No foreign diplomats are permitted to arrive or depart from the British Isles. 1,500 tanks, 5,000 armored vehicles, 10,000 jeeps and bulldozers, more than 250,000 men. Every facility in every British port is jammed. Do the Germans know? There is no evidence they do. By June 3rd, loading is almost complete. Invasion, D-Day, is set for the early morning of June 5th, 1944. The men on board, cramped, crowded, try to ease the tension by doing familiar things. But mostly they are waiting, trying to put their minds to the pursuit of some thought other than sudden death. Do they have a secret weapon? Will there be gas? What would be the best place to get it? Leg wound, maybe, or shoulder would be good. How will they be home if I die? The choice of month, day, and precise minute of the assault is not casually arrived at. Every facet of the weather is vitally important. The right conditions for the airborne. A short period of daylight for pinpoint bombing immediately before H hour. A relatively low tide so that the beach obstacles can be cleared by demolition men. On schedule, the men face chaos on the beaches, drowning, annihilation. The invasion is set back one day, June 6th. On the ships, the assault troops, crowded with no proper facilities for meals or sanitation, are in misery and often seasick at anchor. There is no sign of a let-up in the storm. 100,000 men may die in 30 minutes if Eisenhower gives the order to go June 6th. June 5th, weather report. Early June 6th, there will be a brief break in bad weather. Eisenhower gives the order, okay, we'll go. The Supreme Commander's worries are not over. One of his trusted aides, Sir Trafford Lee Mallory of Britain, repeatedly has warned Eisenhower of the futile slaughter if the two American airborne divisions are dropped on the Cotantam Peninsula. The flak is too strong, the terrain too unsuitable, he insists. Eisenhower knows the Germans have ringed every field with machine guns, planted every possible landing place with poles to tear the wings off gliders. He knows, too, that without the paratroopers to cut off German reinforcements, Allied soldiers will have small chance for life on the beaches. The decision is made, but even while they are in the air, doubt gnaws in his mind, tugs at his heart. This is the largest. The President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, offers a prayer.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. And we know that by thy grace and by the righteousness of our cause, our sons will triumph.
June 6th, 1944. There were many prayers that day, and a lot of gunpowder was expended. As the men prepared to land on the beaches, the thunderous battle between naval guns and German shore batteries continued, the greatest sea-land duel in history.
Infantrymen are nervous, but their confidence is bolstered by the Allied barrage. German gun positions, they feel, must be shattered. The first wave loads aboard landing craft for the run to the beaches, 12 treacherous miles in. The men are cold, wet, and afraid. Strong men are weakened by seasickness. Others take too many Dramamine pills, first major use of the drug. They become sleepy. H hour minus 30 minutes. 2,500 Allied planes slash at 50 miles of German-held coast. Someone has to go first. These men are going first. There are 5 code-named beaches, 2 American, Utah and Omaha, 2 British, Gold and Sword, and 1 Canadian, Juno. To shield the infantry and give them support on the beaches, small amphibious tanks are supposed to lead the way in. It is the first disaster. In 1 battalion of 32 tanks, 27 are swamped in the rough surf. On Omaha Beach, the attack is all but forgotten. Now it is a matter of survival. The German defenses have survived the heaviest bombardment in history. On 1 beach, 80% of German guns are firing. It is an infantryman's nightmare. Germans on the cliffs level plunging fire at the men coming out of the landing boats. Men try to hide by ducking underwater. Many are hit and killed or are wounded and drowned. Utah alone is relatively quiet. In the first hour, the assault achieves less on Omaha than had been expected of it in the first 5 minutes. Up and down the line from Omaha to Sword, 2,500 of our men die in a few hours of hell. 8,500 more are ripped with steel fragments and bullets. And General Bradley on his command ship says, Overlord has run beyond the reach of its admirals and generals. For the next few hours, we can do little but pace our decks and trust in the men to whom the plan has been given for execution. Omaha, most hard-pressed point of all, The beach cliffs provide a temporary sanctuary for both the fighters and the wounded. A few hundred tanks and trucks are brought ashore, but most of them are trapped between the rising tide and the bluffs. When the Germans realize the Normandy landing is a major invasion, they move up reinforcements to throw the Allies back into the sea. And Hitler commands, no rear guard action, no retiring to new lines of resistance. Every man shall fight and fall where he stands. But Allied air superiority makes a horse and wagon army of the vaunted Wehrmacht. There are fewer than 200 German planes left to defend Normandy. Rommel to Keitel, the enemy has complete command of the air over the battle zone. Maneuver by our troops on the field of battle in daylight is thus almost entirely prevented. The 50 miles of coastline are not all beach. 10 miles of rock cliffs jut out into the channel between the British and American sectors. From here, German gunners command the ground below. The sheer rock walls must be reached before they can be scaled by U.S. Rangers and British commandos. Anchor-like projectiles are fired to the tops of the cliffs with dangling ropes attached for the Rangers and commandos to climb up in the face of direct fire. The Germans dislodge the anchors, cut the ropes, roll hand grenades down the slopes, but still the attackers keep coming. Gain the top and push the Germans inland. With the Luftwaffe destroyed, communications poor, Rommel desperately tries to organize a counteroffensive. He has told Hitler months before, unless we stop them on the beaches, we are finished. But with a professional's dedication, he orders his men to fight on. June 7th, D+1. Allied commanders Montgomery and Bradley confer with Commander-in-Chief Eisenhower. By evening, the issue at Omaha will be settled. All beachheads will be secure. The invasion is a tactical success. The problem now is to get 1 million men ashore in the next month, and food for them to eat, and guns for them to shoot, and transportation. That day, June 7th, gigantic concrete boxes are towed across the channel and sunk a few hundred yards off the beaches. The foundations for a man-made harbor called Mulberry. Now ships can tie up to these offshore docks and discharge their supplies. A quarter of a mile of hastily constructed causeway brings the cargo from Mulberry to the shore. Men, transportation, and ammunition flow onto the beachhead. The buildup is rapid now. follow, despite strong Allied pressure, the Germans fight for every village, every cow pasture, each inch of country road and highway. The German High Command reports, if the enemy succeeds in fighting his way out of the present bridgehead, all France is lost. Then, an enemy more formidable than the Wehrmacht strikes. Weather. First rain and mud, rough going. The worst June storm in 40 years. By mid-afternoon of June 19th, D+13, no troops, ammunition, or supplies can be landed to support these men. The storm, says General Eisenhower, is imperiling our very foothold on the continent. Mulberry begins to break up. In the American sector, it disintegrates. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of equipment are ripped apart in 3 terrifying days. 800 ships wash ashore. Then the storm stops as suddenly as it started. It is June 22nd, D+16. Without fresh replacements, short of ammunition and supplies, the Allied attack stalls. There are 3 critical days as the Germans regroup their defenses. Then, as supplies flow again, the Allies push forward. The objective now, Cherbourg, with its fine harbor. Until it is taken, the troops are at the mercy of English Channel weather. The strongest elements of the German army are being held off by the British and Canadian troops at Caen, while the Americans shoot for the prize, Cherbourg. Headquarters maps, the advance looks good. In the field, Allied soldiers are still being killed and captured. In some areas, the French have suffered more from Allied bombardment than from German occupation. Their homes and villages have been destroyed. Not all of them understand. They take out their hostility on Allied prisoners. But the overwhelming majority of Frenchmen want liberty more than the barn, the house, the cows they have lost. They are friendly and helpful. Truly brave Frenchmen, and there are many of them, risk their lives to fight with the secret underground, the Maquis. Their work behind the German lines is worth an Allied division in front of them. Our troops are learning how to fight in the hedgerow country. The fields are heavily mined. There are things they never mentioned at Fort Benning. Find time to learn some of the local customs. Calvados, the breakfast of champions. Fine continental cuisine. But no private bath. French towns on the road to Cherbourg are reduced to rubble as the battle passes through. This is the tough war. Snipers everywhere. A death trap posing as a safe village street. U.S. divisions move abreast up the 25-mile-wide peninsula. The war takes on a pattern. Into a town, push the Germans out the other side, through the hedge-rowed fields to the next town, same story. German Commander Hoffman reports, our men are completely worn out. They are being drained to the last ounce of their inner fortitude. Behind the Germans, Cherbourg is being battered by heavy bombers. On the ground, the Allied drive is relentless, the German peril acute. Adolf Hitler ignores a basic tactical rule and issues a preposterous order. He refuses to allow General Karl von Schlieben, his field commander, to retreat to the strong defenses outside Cherbourg at the peninsula's narrowest point. Hitler to von Schlieben, the line must be held at all costs. German soldiers, following orders, wage a suicidal fight on the peninsula. The war is not all foxholes and hedgerows. It's doorways, too, and gutters, and brick walls. It's soldiers fighting alone or in small groups, individual action. Take more and more prisoners. Germans caught sniping or with hidden weapons are disarmed quickly. On June 26th, the D+20, von Schlieben is captured. He refuses to order his troops to surrender the naval arsenal, the last surviving stronghold inside Cherbourg. There are only a few hundred Germans left there, but von Schlieben knows small groups of diehards can achieve great delays. They have guns, they have ammunition, and they have 8 feet of concrete protection. Allied guns fire point blank. The Germans return shell for shell. Day, a new weapon is used. An American psychological warfare unit persuades the Germans that their cause is hopeless.
Achtung, Achtung, deutsche Soldaten. Und hinter mir steht die gewaltige Macht der amerikanischen Armee. Dies ist der letzte Augenblick.
The microphone proves mightier than the sword. On June 27th, D+21, Cherbourg falls to the Allies. Despite the Germans' belief that the great port is destroyed beyond repair, Allied experts clear the harbor in just 19 days and dock the first ship. The capture of Cherbourg 3 weeks after the first landing in Normandy is called by military experts the greatest Allied strategic triumph of the war.
For the men who fought their way to Cherbourg, the pause was brief. A small swell of pride, momentary relief, and then a return to war. Ahead were Paris, the Vosges, the Rhine, Berlin. Those are the campaigns and bloody battlegrounds on which we are reporting in this continuing series